If they only have the one identity of their work and save, build, it becomes very, very hard because it's not just, oh, you have money and spend it. It's, well, what do I spend it on? I have no hobbies. Who do I spend it on? I have no relationships. And now that I'm not working anymore, I really don't have any relationships. Who do I even want to be with this money?
We're always shooting for goals that don't include relationships. If we include relationships, that's where the power is.
Sometimes even good change, like getting a new great job where you're making a ton of money, or your company sells and now you have a ton of money, or, you have another baby and you're super excited about that. These are wonderful, happy changes, but change is still hard.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show. Today, I want to introduce a very special guest. I've known Dr. Meghaan Lurtz for a long time, and so I'm going to read you her bio for a second, and then we're going to jump into some really fun discussion today about where health, wealth, and time intersect. So Dr. Meghaan Lurtz is a leading global expert on the psychology of financial planning. A dedicated educator, she's the professor of practice at Kansas State University, teaching in the advanced planning and financial therapy certificate programs. She's also a lecturer at Columbia University and Rutgers University, where she teaches financial psychology. She currently serves on multiple financial technology boards, bringing together finances and mental health. And she's an active researcher and writer focusing on the intersection of money, advice, and well-being. And with that, Dr. Meghaan Lurtz. How you doing, Meg?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
That was long.
It is long. You should have just wrote your own, since you do know me. You've been like, I met this woman a long time ago. She was not as cool when I originally met her.
I know.
I'm not even quite sure she's that cool now. Yeah.
Going back to when we met, one of the things that always interested me was how different you were in thinking, because the rest of us are thinking numbers and you're not.
Yeah, that has been a fun part of my job, actually, for a very long time. Even before I met you, so even my first entry into finances, I was working at a place called Total Rebalance Expert. Some people may remember that. It was in competition with iRebal, and what it was a portfolio rebalancing system that did things tax efficiently. It was pretty sweet. My mom was the CIO. She actually owns a patent or two, actually, I think, for tax efficient rebalancing. So super math nerd. And I was working there, and I would be talking to financial advisors about, sometimes they would call and we're rebalancing because there was a dip in the market. But a lot of times we were rebalancing because of just some weird family dynamics. Jimmy wrecked the car, Sarah had to go back to rehab, somebody needs to get out of jail, whatever. And in rebalance, so then we're talking about family dynamics, why we're doing the rebalancing. And I just found it fascinating. So fast forward, I was at a conference. It was a TD Ameritrade conference, and I was there, hanging out in the Total Rebalance Expert booth. And these students from Texas Tech University walked up, and I was talking to them, and they were researchers. And I got to talking to a man named Dr. Barry Mulholland, who was kind of leading this group of young researchers. And we got to talking about rebalancing, but also about families and stuff like that. And he goes, well, if you like that, maybe you should call, my former student, Dr. Sonia Luter. She's at Kansas State, and they do this thing, called financial therapy. And I was like, all right, so he, doesn't know me from Adam and chooses to introduce me to Sonia Luter and Dr. Christy Archuleta. I have a conversation with them. It goes great. I decide, okay, I'm going to go back to school again and get this master's certificate in financial therapy. I took 2 classes and I switched over to the PhD. I did finish the certificate in financial planning. I did finish the certificate in financial therapy, but my PhD is technically in personal financial planning. And I have always been interested in the psychology side. My background before getting into finance was all in industrial organizational psychology. And so I've always liked thinking about how people think and why they do what they do, and how people operate as a couple and as a family, and like how that, how that works when it then money gets layered on top of all that. It's infinitely fascinating. It's infinitely fascinating.
Yeah. So where do you fit in that conversation? Here's let me set this up. I thought about this for a hard minute a couple years ago, where I had a couple in the office and they were not getting along.
Yeah.
And it was very clear at some point early on that my skill set was not going to be enough. So where does a financial, I don't know what you want to call yourself. Are you a financial therapist, a financial psychologist? You tell me, but where does that, when does that come into play?
I think I like to call myself more of like a financial behavioralist, because I'm not a full-blown psychologist. I have a master's in industrial organizational psychology, which I describe to my students as, they're a therapist that really like to talk to you and really like to interact with you. And I like that to a certain extent, but there's a reason that I became a therapist, an IO psych versus a therapy psych. And it's because as the IO psych, my favorite thing is actually to watch two other people talk and just kind of watch the interaction. So I do the couples work, and in this situation, it's not uncommon. Couples, whether it's for good reasons or for bad reasons, whether there's high tension or sometimes, it's just hard to talk about money. You come from two different I was literally just in New Zealand, and I was talking to an advisor. It was a very heartfelt conversation. He was telling me how for 4 years, the 4 early years of his marriage, every single time he would try to talk to his wife, this is a financial planner trying to talk to his wife about money, that she would either shut down or it would somehow be like a fight. And over time, I guess he just kind of wore her down in the way that he described it. But it eventually came out that in her early years and her growing up in her family, that when money was brought up, it was volatile. Like people were fighting. It wasn't good. And so she learned at a very young age, if don't ask about money, don't talk about money. And if other people are talking about money, like leave the room. And so there can be stuff like that as the financial advisor, you can't control that. And as the client may not even be thinking about that. They may just be in the room and they're trying to decide together, do I want to buy a new house? Do I want to retire? Do I want to stay at home with the kids? Do I want to send my kids to private school? Like, there are many, many decisions, all important, and varying levels of like what it actually costs to do that. And sometimes we don't even understand, why the tension arises or where the tension comes from. And this is one of those things where, maybe they can't reach an agreement. Maybe there's tension. Maybe one partner is just silent. They're just not, they don't feel quite as comfortable talking. This is a great opportunity for a person like myself to come in, and where the advisor would say, this would be like the advisor script, because the advisor may or may not have time to go there. They may or may not want to go there, as sort of you described, that you think, well, I could probably talk about this, but it feels like a little bit out of my depth. So you may say then as the advisor, hey guys, I'm noticing that there's some different perspectives, on this decision. And both of you have had, completely valid things to say, completely valid things to talk about. Sometimes, couples find it helpful to work with a financial therapist, a financial behavior specialist, to talk through underlying values, concerns, issues. And this really helps, to figure out how to move forward and actually implement what we're going to do. Working to try to find alignment, between the two of you in your coupleship, is one of the most important things. Would you be willing to have, me connect you with this person? And so I think the opportunity there is then, now that financial advisor doesn't have to do it, depending on how the financial advisor wants to have the relationship set up, the financial advisor can join that meeting. The financial advisor can kind of wait, and there might be 2 or 3 sessions with the financial behavioral specialist, financial psychologist, financial therapist. And then the couple goes back to the advisor with a clearer picture of what they want, and probably some greater just self-awareness, which is wonderful, probably affect all decisions moving forward. And then after that, then you decide like what do you really want? And so there are opportunities to work like that again on things that are difficult, and even sometimes just things are, especially with families and couples, sometimes even good change, like getting a new great job where you're making a ton of money, or your company sells and now you have a ton of money, or you have another baby and you're super excited about that. These are wonderful, happy changes that I think any of us would be like, yes, maybe not extra babies, but like most of the time, we're like, yes, this is good. But change is still hard. Just because it's a change that you want, or a change that sounds like, oh, that's pretty good, that does not mean that navigating the change itself will not be difficult for any number of reasons. And trying to figure out, how to live differently now that there are other options on the table is not always easy. And so I think that there's real value in talking to somebody, and for having that information then travel back to the financial plan.
Let's dig into that a second, because you brought up something I think is interesting. You kind of hinted at this. Change is hard. And so it's a question of sometimes changing behavior, changing meaning, but sometimes it's changing relationships. And I think what I've seen is people sometimes jump to the changing relationships part too fast. Literally, their answer, to your point, like, I don't know all the history sometimes, but they sit here and they'll say, we're not getting along, let's get divorced. That's changing a relationship over God knows what. But how do you have that conversation with someone about the intersection of either changing behavior, meaning, or relationships?
I can't even always say that necessarily meaning changes, but I think that meaning expands. And I can't even always say that the relationship has to change, but there are aspects of it that are going to expand, especially if it's going to stay together. There's some very great couples work. Maybe you're familiar, John, with John Gottman. You ever heard of the Gottman Institute? Awesome research, awesome everything. I feel like the Gottmans became famous because they wound up in Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point.
I think that's where I saw it.
Yeah. And in that book, this is like, I've never met the Gottmans. I've always kind of secretly wanted to go, but I've never gone, because the statistic in Malcolm Gladwell's book, which is also written about in the Gottmans books, they've written like 5 or 6 of them, maybe 7 at this point, is that within 6 seconds, apparently John can tell whether or not you and your partner are going to stay together. And so like, I really want to meet them, but maybe alone, like, I don't know if I want that.
Wouldn't that be fun though, to bring him to a party and just say,
yeah,
I'm going to let you walk the room. You tell me who's staying together.
He's totally the person you want to go sit in like Central Park with or something like that, and just people watch and be like, no, yeah, you're good. No. So great couples researcher. The thing that is so amazing about his work is, he has studied why people divorce, why people stay together. And one of the things that we know about why people stay together, because it's not how they fight.
Yeah.
People fight. And people actually fight to the point of what we're talking about today, money. People actually fight a lot about money. It's one of the number one cited reasons to see a therapist. It's one of the highest stress reasons that people have in their lives. So even if they're not fighting about it, sometimes it can just be stressful, and general stress can put stress on a marriage. It is one of those things that we're not told to talk about. Like most of us don't grow up in homes, even if it's not fighting, we don't grow up in homes where we talk about it a lot. And so now you have these 2 people who have 2 different ideas about when to talk about money or how to talk about money. They're trying to talk about each other or trying to talk to each other. They're somewhat failing to do that, either because of a lack of language or a differentiation in values that they're having trouble communicating about. And I think Gottman would tell you that this is not a failure, that this does not mean that you have to get a divorce, but there has to be a real work towards coming back together and the relearning again and again. This is what you see with couples that have been married for 50 years, that, they kind of move apart a little bit, but then they come back together, and they move apart a little bit and then they come back together. It's when, the 7-year itch. Okay. That happens not because people wake up in year 5 and they're like, well, I know everything about you, John, and you know everything about me. So like, we don't actually have to talk anymore. We can just kind of live our lives at this point. When we do this, when we sort of stop learning new things about our partner, things begin to degrade and fall apart. And so it takes a really active couple in the sense that you're actively coming back together. I will say, speaking to the dark side of money, if you will. So I will say you don't have to get divorced because of money. There are definitely ways to work that out. And in fact, the most recent John Gottman book, for anybody that's listening to this and you're interested, it's called Fight Right. And it has like a whole section on money and how we don't get at the deeper values. And if we could get at the deeper values of, when you buy gifts, it means this. When you don't buy it, when you spend time, it means this. If you could get more at that, then you would probably fight less. You could communicate better. So there's that. There is the dark side of money and the dark side of marital counseling, that a lot of people that go to marital counseling, I think it's only like maybe a third of them like get divorced or something like that. It's pretty high. It's not like, oh, go to therapy and it will fix it. Sometimes going to therapy highlights the fact that maybe you two should not be together.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even say that a therapist's job is to keep people together. A therapist's job is to help people to understand themselves and therefore be able to communicate with their partner. And sometimes you find that even though you can now communicate it, it's still not what you want. It's still not what each other want. And money is one of those things, if you're fighting about it money is one of those things that people perpetually fight about. That it never really goes away, and it can remanifest and show up in different ways at different times in your life. So if you're fighting about money, if you have fought about money, you can be assured that you're probably going to continue to fight about money. Again, it doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but you will have to work at coming together again and again and again and finding different ways to, I won't even say compromise. I don't think that compromise works, and I'll talk to you about that in a second, but you have to find ways to cooperate. Very different from how I think about compromise. So with money research, we know that when people fight when they're younger, so like if you're first married and you're fighting about money, the odds are good that you'll get divorced over money, or at least divorced later on, because the fighting escalates and it gets worse. It doesn't solve and solve and solve and, new things pop up. It just gets worse. And this is obviously not good. I wouldn't want somebody to stay, in a marriage where things are uncomfortable or obviously violent would be horrible. And so just thinking about that it's not a cure-all, and thinking about how we fight about money and when we fight about money, and that fights about money will continue, and that it's more important to figure out the root of those and see then if there can be a discussion that can be had about the root, versus the money itself. Because most of us, at the end of the day, it's not about the money. It's about what the money represents. And either that's not being met or that's not being felt.
And that's when you are talking about this, that's where my head goes. Because you talk about if they fight early, it's going to lead to something later. Well, later oftentimes is they have plenty of money and they're still fighting.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we have a hard time with, I know talking to clients, is getting them to just spend money when they actually have it, because they hoard money while they don't have it. And then as soon as they have a lot of it because of a business sale or whatever, I can't convince them sometimes to spend and enjoy life. And the reality of that is, if they don't do it the day they die, their kids are flying first class anyways. Like, their kids will spend it. So why aren't they enjoying it? I don't know if you've run into this. How do you have that conversation?
This is another thing that kind of leads to that. Like this goes back to even why being able to that we don't just want to give in to the other person. We want to be able to hold our ground, and we don't want to create situations where it's like lose-lose. Loss aversion. This is like that loss feels very, very painful, especially when it comes to money versus gain of the same magnitude. That when people agree to just compromise, like, oh, I'm going to lose a little bit and you're going to lose a little bit, but we can come together. When this happens in finances, it feels very bad, which is why we continue to fight about it. It doesn't go away. You compromise, you're good for like 6 months. And then the problem is like, once again, back. And so it really has to be, this greater commitment to understanding the deeper value being able to get at it and find a win-win situation. I don't say that like in a woo-woo, oh yeah, find your win-win. Like, no, like really, really fight for what you want and fight for and have your partner fight for what they want, but also be vulnerable, with the person that you've chosen to spend your life with, and ask for what it is that you want. And, as far as this, so this is another big thing, and a big thing that actually comes up a lot in financial behavioral work, financial therapy work, is, when we have spent our whole lives saving, building, saving, building, saving, building, the save and build muscles are like super strong. And we also kind of know that as a muscle memory. And we've been told how valuable that is. We've been rewarded, so many times for that behavior. And now we say, okay, you don't have to do that. If people have never developed the muscle of, they also like pickleball, they also like to go to France, they also like fancy wine, they also like, making pottery. I don't care. They like having dogs and they want 27 of them. Like if they only have the one identity of their work and save, build, it becomes very, very hard, because it's not just, oh, you have money and spend it. It's, well, what do I spend it on? I have no hobbies. Who do I spend it on? I have no relationships. And now that I'm not working anymore, I really don't have any relationships. Who do I even want to be with this money? Oh, I don't really have an identity. And I don't mean that in like a mean way, but so many of us, I myself am notoriously bad at this. My financial advisor asked me, when I wanted to retire, and I said 97. And he goes, what are you going to do until you're 97? And I was like, I'm going to be a professor. It is who I am. I love to teach. I love to talk about what I do. And I can't imagine a day that I wouldn't do that. Even if I had, all the money in the bank that I needed, and my financial advisor was, look, you're a rich lady, just live your life. I don't know how. Like my only way to live is to be a professor. And so I think for advisors, this isn't, yes, this can be a conversation that you have with a financial therapist, and it's a good one. Transitions, be it from businesses selling or just you finally retiring, these are some of the most critical and most important transitions that people will make. As the financial advisor, if you're working with this person and you know that selling the business or retiring is on the horizon, if you've got 5 years time, 10 years time, encourage people to experiment. You can't make them change. They don't like that. And it's hard. And they're busy with other things, but you can make them experiment. Like, hey, you said that you played pickleball one time and it was cool. How about you start playing once every other week? Like you can commit to that, and you've got the time and the money to do that, or, you say that you want to spend, 4 months in France every year in Nice. Like, have you ever been to Nice? Like, do you speak French? No? Okay. Then how about, this year you go for a week and let's pick up some French classes, at the local community college. Like, get them to spend some of their money over that 5-year period or over that 10-year period in small doses, trying to work towards the things that they say that they want. Because then you have some muscle memory, you've developed some muscle knowledge of spending. You actually know the thing that you like. There is a big problem in psychology where we tell people all the time, oh yeah, just give me a goal, a goal. But we are super bad at knowing what we're going to like in the future. Your body, your mind, your lifestyle, everything changes so much. How could you possibly know at 42? How could I possibly know what I'm going to like at 62? I don't. I might have some ideas, but it's important that we start to actively engage in those things. So again, as a financial advisor, you can come up with little games, or in the sense that try this, let me know how it goes. Okay, next year you liked that. All right, let's do that for longer. So then when the client has officially transitioned, they've sold the business or whatever, they've spent some time probably like on a yacht hanging out for a little bit. Okay, they get bored with that. Then, have them come in and talk with somebody and learn about, what they want and what the different things might be. And there's different exercises that different financial behavioral people have, myself included, that help people think through what they want and who they want to be. And there can be, another set of sort of experimental exercises and trying to just, where do they want to go with that? There can be, especially if you're talking about like high net worth and ultra high net worth, and now there's other family members involved. There's no way that they're going to spend all of this money. How do we begin to bring those next generation into that wealth? What do we want them to know? Yes, how do you want the trust to work? But how do we want to talk about this? How do we want to make family financial decisions? How do we make independent financial decisions within a family system? These are difficult questions to ask. These are difficult questions to work through. Again, I believe that a financial advisor can help a lot, but working with a financial behavioral specialist who works with families, understands dynamics, knows how to facilitate, knows how to mediate. These are other or additional, whether you want to call them technical communication skills or you want to call them therapeutic skills, however you want to see it, that it is a skill. And that the other thing that's good about that, this is kind of a weird thing to say for my work, but as the financial advisor, you don't want to be the person that does that. Jon, you don't want to go in front of this family that's got, 2 generations worth of wealth in this room, and they're upset. Generation 2 is upset with generation 1. You're like, okay, I think I can solve this. Let's, talk about some stuff together. The whole thing blows up. Who's going to get fired? Jon,
Yep.
You. But if you bring me in, then you get to stay on the same side of the table as the family. And you, at the end, you could be like, I didn't like her. She didn't help, and just fire me. But that way you, the financial advisor, don't get fired. There is that aspect of it too, whether that's right or wrong.
One of the things you said that's interesting is goals to me are not that exciting, simply because half the time you set a goal, you get there, and then you don't want it.
Right. All the time.
People, I want the big house. They get it. It's not that important anymore. And people say, okay, well, then I won't buy stuff. It's not just about buying stuff. It's also about retirement. When I get to this age and have this amount of money, I'm set. And its reality is they're not. They're unhappy as all get out. I think you've seen this, the MIT Age Lab study that said, if you're lonely in retirement, it's like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day because it'll kill you.
14 cigarettes a day. That's what loneliness is. That's what loneliness does to your body.
To me, one of the thoughts that brings up is that we're always shooting for goals that don't include relationships. If we include relationships, that's where the power is.
Yeah.
And I think too many people don't focus on that part. Now, that same study said something like we need 150 relationships at all times, which aren't our best friends. Some of them are the baristas. But, even if I go to Starbucks and I see the same barista every day, it is a relationship that calms me down and makes me feel connected to the community. So to me, that's where I think we fall off as advisors. I think what I see with clients, I see that all the time. They're missing the relationship part.
And as people transition, that makes relationships hard. Like if you grow up, let's say you grew up in a middle class socioeconomic status, you had your business, now you sold your business, and you've got $50 million. You are no longer likely in the same socioeconomic status that you grew up in. And probably many of your friends remain in that socioeconomic status, but you are now very different. And sure, your friends, your buddies will still be your buddies. But when you want to go to the Poconos on a private jet and get an island, I don't know what you do with $50 million, probably not an island, but you're going to do that they can't do. And so there can be, not always, but could be a strain on the relationship. You feel weird, maybe they feel weird. And so it can be hard to sometimes keep those relationships up. Again, even internal family dynamics, can change because of this. And I 100% agree with you that relationships are like the number one thing. Was a book that came out, I think it's been like 4 or 5 years at this point, but it was called The Good Life.
Yeah.
And it was by Waldinger and Scholes. These are the gentlemen that are in charge of the Harvard longitudinal study that has been going on now for a long, long time. And in that book, I remember reading that book for the first time, and I'm reading the health research that is in that book, going to the point that you were making about relationships and how healthy they make us. They talk about how, because they're studying the same people over time, so they can see, John's got 150 good relationships. Well, Susan's got, 8. And so then they look and they say, okay, well, when Susan gets sick, how quickly does Susan get better? When John gets sick, how quickly does John get better? They begin to see things like this. And so some of the stuff that they saw, looking at that, not just on 2 people, but on, thousands of people at this point, they see things like the people that do have more positive relationships in their life, they get sick less and they heal faster. And when I read that for the first time, I thought to myself, I grew up with all brothers. I have 3 younger brothers, and they loved comic books. And Wolverine was like one of their favorite characters. And Wolverine can heal faster. That's like one of the reasons why he's like a cool mutant person, is because he can heal faster. And I thought, what amazing science is that all it takes is being loved and loving other people, and you become literally superhuman. You literally heal faster, get better, everything, because you are loved. And in the society that we live in today, where we have lots of Facebook friends, we don't have real friends, that we would talk to the AI versus talking to our friends, that there is a big difference between consumption and connection at the brain level. Scrolling, doom scrolling, maybe not even doom scrolling, but just, I read the news very quickly every morning. It doesn't ever make me feel good. But if I call my best friend and I talk to her about, whatever crazy thing has happened, I feel better. Can my friend and I solve anything? No. Can doom scrolling solve anything? No. But consumption is not the same as connection. And when it comes to our finances, we can focus on consumption. We can buy things, we can do stuff, or we can focus on connection. We can redo the kitchen so that our family, comes over every Sunday and has dinner. That this will be what heals you. This is how to spend the money and the time with the people that you love. And research bears this out too. There's actually been people have looked at, can you buy happiness essentially? Dr. Brian Portnoy, his book, The Geometry of Wealth, has a whole chapter on this, and it's really great. Brian is a great writer. It has a whole chapter. It's great. And really, we don't quite know, but we're pretty sure that if you spend money, doing things with people, that you give charitably, and are a part of that, not just writing a check that you hope nobody knows that you ever did it, but that you're a part of it in some way, that these all, are truly ways to spend money to bring about happiness. Most of the time, money is more of an insulator of pain. If your roof blows off, it sucks. It really sucks if you can't afford to fix it. But if you can't afford to fix it, are you happy about that? No. But are you insulated from having to sleep, in the rain? Yeah. And so most of money spending works like that it just insulates us from annoying pain or stuff like that. But we can also spend it in a way that helps us to actually enjoy it. And it very, very much matters that we would be spending it on time and people that we love and want to spend time with and make us feel good about ourselves in active ways. So not the AI, not the social media, but actually having dinner with somebody that you care about.
How do you have that conversation with the next generation? Because they're scrolling constantly and they don't want to talk to people.
It is my greatest hope.
If you're meeting with that second generation, but if you're meeting with the second generation or the third generation of a family, how do you get them to see how important this part is? Because I can't remember the book, but he talks about 100-year thinking in generation in wealth, and how it's not just about the money. It's totally about thinking about the capital, the social capital, the education capital, all the different parts of capital that come with that. And the next generation doesn't see it.
I don't know that they don't see it. I mean, they're smart, just like all of us. They just have different forms of distraction, that they are used to. And, sometimes all of us are, feel the need to like retreat into that for one reason or another. So I don't want to demonize it, but certainly it happens a lot. I think I read some statistic that like 18-year-olds, by the time they are 65, will have spent like 9 years on their phones or something like that. And it's like, whoa, that does not seem good. I think that there can, one, if you're the financial planner, set some expectations. It's okay for you to say, hey, we're all going to get together and we're actually going to have no phone time. Everybody's going to put the phone in the basket. This will be over in 3 hours. You can have it back then. But we want to spend some active time thinking about this in an active way, using just your brain, and as long as you make it fun and you tell people ahead of time, hey, this is what we're going to do, then it is very rare that I think people will buck from that. If you set the expectation ahead of time. Another thing that you can do, is to people like it when you're curious about them, young people and less young people. I think that, really showing interest in another person, young people don't get that as often anymore. And so, when you get them in your office, just saying, hey, I want to learn, more about you. Is it okay if we set the phones down and talk a little bit more about this?
What's interesting about that from what you just said is, I've had that conversation with first generation. The first generation isn't always interested in what the second generation has to say.
Yeah.
It's almost like they look down on them and say, I earn the money, just listen. And it's like, that's probably not the way to handle it.
No, people have to feel connected to it. People have to feel connected to it. And that's going to come out in different ways. This is one of those things where the family, may have a motto or a belief or a value statement that they want to uphold as a family. And if they do it together as a family, not just the matriarch and patriarch saying, this is our motto, but everybody kind of doing it together, which can be a very fun exercise. Then the next part, and this can be very hard for G1, is to allow G2, G3, to creatively and individually participate in that motto. Which may mean different things for different people. And they should be allowed, or we want them to be allowed to express that. I think that sometimes where it can't be, do it like me. It can't be, listen because I say so, or listen to your point, listen because, I made the money. I clearly know what I'm doing. And there has to be a real desire from the whole family to have something that they want to work towards. So you feel a part of something bigger, but then also allow the flexibility for different people to work towards that thing in different ways, for their individuality to come out, for the different aspects of it that maybe this person values, but this person doesn't. And to, this is another thing that, again, working with a trained mediator, a trained financial behavioral person, it's hard to hold that space. It is not easy to say, hey, G1, we're going to listen to G2. And it's not, and if you've been the financial advisor to G1 for a while, and now you're like, shasha, they don't like that. But
it's really hard. Yeah, no, it's really hard. I mean, yep. If you don't say everything perfect, it can turn on you.
Yes. And it can really be helpful to have an outside person come in, hold the space, hold the room, allow for different people to talk, to help process some of the vulnerability, help process some of the different ideas, to, even, and advisors experience this, I think, on a micro level all the time when you have a coupled client. It is not uncommon that you just have one client that's a little bit more talky. You probably know this client maybe a little bit more, and their partner or their spouse, is maybe just a little bit quieter. And maybe they're quieter because they don't care. Maybe they're quieter and they're fine with that. Maybe they're quieter because they don't know, how they're supposed to talk about this stuff. They're not sure how to talk about this stuff. Maybe they grew up in a family where you didn't really talk about money. And so as a financial advisor, just trying to manage, hey, Jeff, we've heard from you. This has been really great. Super valid points. Susan, how about you? Like just making sure that you go back and forth, starting, with a different one each time. Like the small things like this, can really make a difference in a coupled situation. But that in and of itself is a difficult skill to master, how to pull the more quiet or reserved for, again, various reasons, some of them good, maybe some of them less good, to quiet the one that wants to talk, also good, sometimes not good, and to serve not only the individuals, but the coupleship, because as a financial advisor, again, you're probably going to relate to one of these people more than the other. Again, I always think of like housing decisions in this time. I love architecture. I fantasize, about having like certain houses. I think it's so amazing to meet. My husband could care less. My financial advisor also loves architecture. It is not necessarily why we are buds, but he digs it, And so sometimes I think when I talk, he's like, yeah. He's like, get the crown moldings, do the things. Yes, word work, all the things. And I feel like my husband is like, whoa, you two are planning this house and I'm just along for the ride. And and is my advisor doing that on purpose? Absolutely not. He loves both of us. We're both active in the relationship, but there can and does have events of like, a triangulation where, two people, the advisor is buddying up, with one of the clients, and now the other client feels left out, whether this is intentional or not. And I would argue 9 times out of 10, it is not. But it does happen. And so thinking about that, even in your own client relationships, that again, that this can be something that a reason to call a behavioral specialist. Maybe you have them in your meetings just to watch you have meetings. We don't even have to talk to your clients. We can just be there to talk to you afterwards. And, this can be a helpful way, to learn about yourself, to learn about your communication, to learn about your clients, because it's not easy.
So with the few minutes I have left here, I have a friend, he's in his 90s, who sat down with his 3 generations now, I think it is, and had everyone write a mission statement for the family. And then he revisits it every year and makes sure everyone's still on track. But he makes sure that everyone gets heard. Mm-hmm. One of the things that came out of that I thought was interesting is he said it changed the family's willingness, let's say, to talk about death, because he's the one that's probably closest to death. And it just strikes me, because I've read some of your stuff about death, and could you just give us a couple minutes? This is going to be a whole nother podcast maybe at some point, but a couple of minutes on why is it so hard for us to talk about death? And I'm fascinated by some of your writings about how it's almost a clinical problem now, mm-hmm. in some ways. So I'll just let you run from there.
Yeah, death is hard. One, because none of us know what happens. We like to believe that certain things will happen, but none of us really know. And it's a final letting go. If you have a big family and now you're not there, not even to control, you're not there to counsel, you're not there to hug somebody that needed a hug. Like that is a frightening thing for people. So it's frightening about, will there be nothing? Will there be something? What will it be? And then I can't be there for my family, and, they might need me, for one reason or another. So those things are hard. Another thing that's hard is, I honestly think this is the harder part than death itself, is just talking about how our bodies change. Like that, like I'm going to be 42 in 4 days. And when I turned 40, like all my friends that were 40, my mom, all the women in my life were like, oh yeah, when you turn 40, your body just dies. And I'm like, no way. That's like not going to happen to me. I'm going to be fine. No, 40 and a half. body dead. Like I have none of the stamina, none of the metabolism, none, and so apparently when you turn 70, this happens again. and then 80, 90, like your body starts to change so fast. And it's so hard. I mean, there's the end of history illusion working against you. There's this, I don't want to think about that working against you. There's just the biology of it. And, some things degrade and you can't do anything about that either. And the slow slipping away of your body, which in some ways, is also tied to our identity. This is frightening for people. Just the feeling of being trapped and not being able to do what you want to be able to do. I think is also quite frightening, which isn't even reaching the full point of death.
Mm-hmm.
I think also people just have lots of questions about death. There's also the question of, and this is what I had written a lot about, like, what does it mean to have a good death? And this is what, kind of what you were alluding to when it became about so much of dying these days is about keeping people alive. And it's not about dying well. And there's a big difference between the two. Am I dying well or am I just prolonging life? And what type of life is it? Is that really what I want? And at the time I was reading a bunch of different things on death. There's Viking deaths and and there's forest deaths and there's the hospice version and there's actually so many different ways to die. That seem probably good for one reason or another, but we don't talk about that. We talk about what medication you want to be on, what ventilator are we going to put you on, we try to medicalize away, what is happening to a point where, some people would have you believe that you don't have to face it. And we do. and facing it is important, but how to talk about that, how to, who do you want to read your eulogy? What do you want them to say? What memory do you like? If you could have your last days, surrounded by people that you love, reminding you of some of their most memorable moments. Like I'm about to cry right now because I'm thinking of my grandmother who is still alive, but she's like 95. And whenever I see her, I love her telling me stories about when I was young, and I loved telling her stories about what I remember from her spending so much time with us when we were young. If I had to go out, that would be the way, surrounded by my family, telling me stories about the time that we had together. And maybe for other people, they're like, ugh, no, I can't stand my family. I just want to be alone in the forest. Okay. But have that talk with somebody, let somebody know how you want to be remembered, how you want to go out, who you want to read what you want to have happened, beyond just, okay, my estate documents are in place and, my gravestone is picked out. Okay, those things are important, yes, but some of these other ones are. And if we wait too long, then there are conversations that we never get to have. And I also think, whether this is good or bad or morbid or not, there are, as I was talking about, when I was 40, it's going to happen again at 70. There are many deaths along the way. M-A-N-Y and M-I-N-I, lots of deaths all along in life. And what if we got better at talking about those too? What if we, and would that help us, to be more prepared, for this ultimate end? It's the most human thing, that we go through, and along with birth. And we spend all this time, thinking about birth, or at least certainly I did as a mother. And can we spend as much time, thinking about our death and caring for ourselves and caring for others, and really feeling then when we do go, at peace, and that what was said needed to be said. There is certainly the grieving, that comes afterwards. There can be grieving even before. And, that's an important thing to think about and talk about as well. But yeah, not talking about it is certainly not the way.
I think that's what I've taken from some of the stuff you've written as well as others. I remember when my father passed, my mother's response was, I never felt so loved in how much he prepared me for him not being here anymore. And I think that's where families miss. I think a lot of families don't want to talk about it, but it's a chance for the person that's dying to still show that they love everybody. And it's a chance for everyone there to show the person that's dying that they're supported. And that gets missed. It gets missed a lot when people aren't talking.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother podcast. So now that we've hit every phase of life, let's wrap it up. Where can people find you if they want to read more of your stuff, Meghan?
I have a Substack. It's called Less Lonely Money. It's monthly. It's free. So I'm not too, my Meghan is spelled quite odd. So if you manage to Google my name correctly spelled, it will pop right up, which is a nice thing. I also publish quite a bit on LinkedIn. So if you're more of a LinkedIn person, you can find me there. And yeah, I would say that those are probably the two main places. If you're interested in the behavioral, financial, psychology, financial therapy stuff, there actually is the Financial Therapy Association. You can find people like me. I do that work at a company called Beyond the Plan with a wonderful woman named Ashley Kwame. And we have a team of individuals that we work with to help deploy those needs to different firms and people. So I can also be found there. And yeah, I'm very easy to reach. So like on LinkedIn, you can send me a message. My email is pretty easy to track down. So
yeah, when I asked you to do this, I sent you a message on LinkedIn and you responded pretty quick. So
yeah, I'm not that cool. So like
I know
I'm not,
we all have
I'm
time.
not that popular. Right. I have time. And it was you, Jon. Of course I was going to answer you.
Maybe. All right. Well, thanks for being with us today. I'm going to have you back. You know that because some of the stuff you talk about is fascinating. So thank you for being here today, Meg. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us. And if you want to catch more of the stuff that I'm doing or even want to talk more, you can get me on bgm360.com. Thank you, everyone.